Our Olivia Mitchell is going to present the paper. Title is Exchanging Delayed Social Security Benefits for Lump Sums. Could this incentivize longer work careers? Her co-authors, Jingjing Chai, Raymond Maurer, and Ralph Rogalla, who is here, are also authors of the paper. Maria Fitzpatrick will be the discussant.
Make sure it's up. Super. Well, thank you very much to CEPR and the Stanford Longevity Center. It's a great honor and privilege to be here with you today, especially with such a phenomenal setup for our paper. This is joint work. Ralph Rogalla, my colleague from the University of Frankfurt, is sitting to your left. Raymond Maurer and Jingjing Chai are also on the masthead for this paper. We've done some work jointly. I've done some work separately previously on the determinants of retirement, annuities, Social Security. Some of it's been very behavioral in spirit, but today we're using, I guess, the right side of our brains and using a very sort of conventional neoclassical optimization model to ask the question as to whether some of these delayed benefits that we've just heard about from John and from Sita could be used in a way to incentivize delayed retirement. So there's been a lot of discussion about whether we can get people to work longer, and there are various reasons one might want to do so. The question is, can you do it without being punitive, without punishing people, because that's not going to be very politically feasible. So instead, what we're going to be developing is a model where you get rewarded for delaying retirement in a particular fashion. So what we're going to be looking at is, in particular, how much would behavior change from a theoretical modeling point of view if you offered people a lump sum in lieu of the increased annuity benefit that was actuarially equivalent. In other words, by working a little bit longer, as was just shown, you get a percentage increase in your lifetime annuity payout. What about if you gave it to people as a lump sum? Even without getting into behavioral arguments, what you can be sure of is the lump sum offers people additional options. It lets them consume more leisure or buy more goods and services. Our model, like most people, assume you cannot borrow from Social Security in the future. So once you have that market constraint, allowing people to take a lump sum potentially makes them better off without necessarily making them worse off. And so we'll show how that works. So I don't have to probably preach to the choir here. Social Security is not healthy. The CBO has estimated that the shortfall is actually happening sooner this year than the year before. And by the way, these are all negative numbers on the vertical axis. And so you can see the February 2013 estimate was far below even a few months ago. Social Security is a key component of retirement income for many older people. Here you have the highest quintile on the right, the lowest quintile on the left, and the red is the component of old age income, which is quite substantial even for people in the middle and upper group, but obviously critical for the lowest group. So whatever happens with Social Security is going to be very important for a widespread fraction of the American population. So what we're trying to ask is, would people delay claiming if we offer them a benefit boost as a lump sum instead of as an annuity? And we argue that, at least in our model, that it's rational to prefer a lump sum, even if it's actuarially fair, if you're a risk-averse individual, because you don't know if you're going to live a long time. You don't know many things about your future, what your health might be, and so on. And so giving people the lump sum option could be quite attractive. It also, as was noted yesterday, may be healthier for people to work longer in many instances. And it could, though we're not using that in this particular case, it could help Social Security solvency. So this is actually quite similar to what we saw a moment ago. Under the current rules, the Social Security system increases your benefit as a percentage of your PIA. Under the current system, to get your full benefit, as was just noted, which is 100% of your primary insurance amount, you have to work till 66 or claim at 66. If you claim at 62, you get only 75% of the quote, full benefit. If you delay a year, you get an increment of 6.67%. And you can see what the marginal improvement from delaying is, somewhere between 6, 7, 8%. However, if you were going to delay all the way to age 70, you get a 76% increase in monthly benefits. I spoke at the Senate Aging Committee last week, and nobody knew this fact. So I'm hoping to get the word out just as we all are. Some people are beginning to get it, that you do better financially if you delay claiming. So this is the fraction of men and women. I think blue is for boys, red is for girls, as usual. And this is the delay over, the fraction over time claiming at age 62. But still, over 40% are claiming at 62. So it's very much the norm. And the people that do delay are still, as we heard a moment ago, claiming quite young. And so, in fact, a lot younger than the normal retirement age. So what we're going to be investigating, using our model, is how people might endogenously choose to alter their hours of work, their claiming age, their consumption, their asset allocation, and then ask the question, does this make them better off or not? If it doesn't make them better off, how much less or how much better off are they? And then does it depend on how financially sophisticated they are? So that's the context in which we introduce the model. Given time, I think I'll skip my discussion of related studies, except to say that the work of John and Sita has very much informed our research as well. So our life cycle model, as is conventional, assumes a multi-period utility function where you have consumption and leisure. Alpha is a coefficient that indicates how strongly you value leisure. You could be one of the types that just wants to go play golf or do volunteer work or what have you. This is your current consumption discounted by a discount rate. This is the discounted expected present value of your future consumption, but you don't know if you're going to live or not. So there's a survival probability, which is important in that whole calculation. We have a rate of risk aversion, which is rho, and we have, as I mentioned, the conditional subjective probability of survival. And as I mentioned, there's no borrowing from Social Security in this model. What are the factors that lead to uncertainty in the world? Well, we have stochastic wages. There's a permanent plus a variable component of wages, kind of like the real world. We have two assets, a risk-free bond and a risky stock. We have age-dependent housing costs. We try to do a very careful job integrating realistic taxes and realistic Social Security benefit structures, which is hard, as we just saw. I think, John, you told me one time the whole rule book is like 2017 pages or something. This is the Social Security rule book that the field agents have to listen to and implement. And just for purposes of illustration, today I'm going to be talking about a household, U.S. household, who's headed by a female, middle income, with kind of a moderate risk aversion and a moderate leisure preference. So how do we do this? We construct the model, we simulate it. First we do numerical dynamic optimization, then we simulated 100,000 life cycles, and we end up deriving what consumption is optimally in this environment. Labor supply, meaning hours of work, and also when you claim, when you take your full retirement, asset allocation. And so the backdrop is we take not necessarily the current rules, but a very sort of stylized case where we say, what's the value of claiming as of some earlier age versus deferring? And so here's the way to think about it. For the claiming age, going from 62 to 70, what's the lump sum for delay to age N? And in this second column, it says a percentage of your age 65 benefit. And the final column says, what's the lump sum in dollars that would be equivalent actuarially to claiming at that later age? And this uses age 65 as the normal retirement age. We're going to be updating it to 66 in the future. But so the basic answer is, if you claimed at 68 instead of at a younger age, right, you would get a lump sum of $53,000. So Henry, your numbers were about right when you had estimated them on the back of the envelope. If you claimed all the way at age 70, you get about $89,000, $90,000. So this is using current population mortality tables and a real discount rate of 2%. And obviously the discount rate matters, but this is as an illustration. So we put these options into our model and we ask the question, what would it do to consumption, saving, investment, portfolio allocation, claiming dates? And here's the answer. Now, of course, it matters when you introduce this option. If you introduced it to people who were already age 60, you'll get a different story than if you introduced it to people who were just starting to work and had it to look forward to over their whole life cycle. Because the people who are 20 have a whole lifetime to readjust. People who are 60 already have what they have by that point. So the first thing I want to note is that the lighter bar, I hope you can see that, the lighter bar is what would exist optimally in a world without a lump sum. The darker bar is what would exist in a world where you have access to the lump sum. And these are average results over our 100,000 simulations. If you said to someone who's currently age 60, hey, you can work as long as you want when you claim you get the annuity you're going to get, what you'd see is consumption would be highest and then it would start to drop. Why does consumption drop after retirement? Because you have all this leisure time, which you enjoy, and you can substitute leisure for consumption. However, if you give people access to the lump sum, consumption increases. Why? Because they can potentially invest it, they can earn some returns on it, and they can use some of it to buy more consumption. So that's important. The second thing we show as of age 60, and it's a little bit hard to see, I apologize, is we look at what their average work hours. So from 60 to 70, work hours decline in the world with the annuity. The big difference, though, is that if you have the lump sum, people actually work a little bit longer to age 66, though with declining hours. Why do they work longer if you give them the option to take it as a lump sum? Because they have to delay receiving the benefit. Most of them are going to continue working to get that lump sum and then consume more when they finally get it. So that's interesting for the 60-year-olds. What about if you give the option to 20-year-olds? Well, for 20-year-olds, what you see is there's not much change in consumption up to the age of about 60. Again, as before, so in the graph on the right, we're just looking at the right-hand side, there's an increase in consumption for the 20-year-olds, and not much change in the work hours up until their 60s, where once again, the young folks are going to work a little bit more in response to the access to the lump sum. So the main impact is consumption goes up, work goes up a bit. We also tally the results in this picture, and here what I'm doing is looking at the probability of retiring at a given age as a percent of the population. So if you're in the annuity world at age 60, when are you going to think about retiring? Most people retire between 62 and 64, which is actually quite consistent with the empirical evidence. If you offer them a lump sum, the mass of the distribution moves down a little bit. So again, this is telling us people are going to delay retirement somewhat. How much? Well, the average retirement age in the annuity world is about 63 and a half. The average retirement age in the lump sum world is about 65. So it's about a year and a half delay in retirement, which is a really big change if you ever looked at retirement models where you try to get people to work a little bit longer. And the probability of working beyond the normal retirement age goes from 4% to 49%. So this is a big, big change in behavior. If you look at the 20-year-olds, again, they have their whole lifetime to change their behavior. Again, the mass does move down somewhat, just as before, and the retirement age goes from 64 and a half to 66. So again, about a year and a half to 2 years. We have some alternative calibrations. The main thing I want to touch on here is what happens if you're financially unsophisticated. By financially unsophisticated, what I mean in this context is that you choose not to invest or you don't have access to the equity market. So all you have is bonds, work, hours claiming. That's basically it. And there's some evidence that people who are financially unsophisticated just don't invest in equities. So for them, what do we see? This is the base case. If with the annuity, they retire at 63 and a half. The financially unsophisticated people work a little bit longer because they don't have as much equity returns throughout their whole lives. If you give them the lump sum, the sophisticated folks increase their retirement age to about 65, as we saw a moment ago, and the financially unsophisticated hardly change their behavior at all. So just by way of background. And then we also look at a case where you might want to potentially, not that I recommend it, reducing the replacement rate to 45%, and obviously you get a big increase in retirement ages. What about the welfare implications? The welfare implications speak to the question of how much better off or worse off are people in the lump sum world versus the annuity world. And the way we measure it is as the annuity equivalent wealth as a fraction of the first year's earnings. And we say how much additional wealth would you need under the annuity scenario to make you as well off as you could be under the lump sum scenario, where you basically have this other degree of freedom of claiming your delay as a lump sum. And what we're going to focus on here is, first of all, the age 60 folks. And the financially sophisticated folks are about 4% better off in terms of welfare. Financially unsophisticated folks are, virtually in the same situation, not much change. And this is if you look at people who are 60. So you've given the financially sophisticated folks a lump sum, which then they can invest as they wish. The unsophisticated folks don't change much. If you look at the younger people who are 20, the results are negative, but they're very, very small. They're virtually zero. And so the older retirees do better, especially with stock market access, and not much impact for the kids. So what do we say by way of conclusion? The reason that I think this might be potentially appealing is that lump sums are seen very attractively by rational people for good reasons, without even going into behavioral reasons. And you can offer people an incentive to delay claiming and potentially work longer. It can have substantially large impacts on retirement ages. Some people benefit and most people aren't hurt hardly at all. Also, the way we've structured the lump sum is it's actuarially fair. That is, if you delay, you get the equivalent in expected present value. But we also know that people that continue to work continue paying into Social Security. And so that could help a little bit, though that wasn't the main purpose of what we tried to do. So I believe, and I think my co-authors agree, that it could be a very politically viable way to enhance the system's ability to survive for the future, to reform Social Security. And I would actually completely disagree with the notion of picking 70 as the normal retirement age and then structuring any decreases from that as punishment. I think it's far more effective to reward than to punish. And rewarding with lump sums could well be a very appealing outcome. So we'll be happy to take any questions, and Ralph will answer any hard ones after the comments. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Maria Fitzpatrick.
Yeah. So while it's being opened, I'll just say thanks to CBER and SCL and Sloan for having us all here. Thanks. I was excited to get the opportunity to read this really nice paper in which, as Olivia just described, she and her co-authors develop a rich, realistically calibrated life cycle model that involves people making decisions about work, retirement, consumption, and investment. And the model has a lot of nice features, including the incorporation of at least some of the important rules regarding Social Security, as well as letting people have preferences over bequests, and also incorporating both labor market and capital market uncertainty. So allowing for periods of, say, high volatility and low returns, or periods of low volatility and high returns in the stock market. All of those are kind of nice features, as well as the fact that they've included analysis for different groups of people with different preferences or who are different ages when the policy is introduced. And of course, the biggest innovation in the model is this offer of a lump sum policy option for people who are willing to postpone their retirement beyond age 65. In present value terms, as Olivia described, the lump sum is equal to the increase in one's traditional Social Security annuity that you would get with a similar sort of delayed retirement. As we just heard, this the option for a lump sum has some effects. It increases consumption and work behavior when people are in their 60s. It changes their mix of asset holding a little bit. But by far the biggest changes are in people's delay of their timing of retirement, or more importantly, their timing, or more precisely, their timing of Social Security benefit collection. So as Olivia described, we see when there's a lump sum option available, 49% of 60-year-olds, when the policy is introduced, delay retirement past age 65, as opposed to the mere 4% of people in their model that would delay retirement beyond age 65 were the lump sum not an option. And there are similar increases for those that are age 20 when the policy is introduced. Why does this happen? Well, what happens is that people have preferences for the flexibility that the lump sum offers them. So unlike the traditional Social Security annuity, the lump sum is liquid, which allows people to, say, use it more easily for bequests, or to invest it in the stock market, or of course to start consuming it more immediately than they can an increased Social Security annuity. So as Olivia described, they made a lot of realistic assumptions in calibrating this model. So they made assumptions about people's preferences, their discount rates, and so on and so forth. They also use some data from the Health and Retirement Survey. They use data on the distribution of income among 60-year-olds in the HRS. And they used the 60-year-olds specifically in the 25th to 74th percentiles of the income distribution. And for each of those percentiles, they then simulate the model. I don't know what it was. The numbers you gave are a little bit different than the numbers in the paper. So let's say they simulate the model 10,000 or 20,000 times for each of those 50,000 percentiles. And then what they present to us in the paper is the average across all of those simulations. And I have a couple of concerns, or maybe reasons that I would prefer to see more than just the averages here. The first is that even for the people in these 50 percentiles of the labor income distribution, the averages could mask substantial variation in the possible effects of the lump sum policy, right? So in fact, when you talked about welfare consequences, on average, the welfare consequences are either essentially zero or maybe a little bit positive, depending on your assumptions about people's preferences. But what that means is that there are some winners, some potential winners, and some potential losers. And I'm really curious as to whether there are potentially big winners and big losers. So one thing you might think about doing, there are many ways that you could represent the distributional aspects of this policy beyond just using the averages. One possibility would be to report the average welfare change with the lump sum option for people at each of the income percentiles. I'm really curious, in part, whether the effects of this policy are associated or correlated at all with people's income, particularly their income if they're 60 when this is introduced. There, of course, you might not want to use, you might not want to present information on all 100,000 iterations or simulations of this model. In particular, some of those involve, people getting exceptionally good draws, a set of an exceptionally good or exceptionally bad draws in the labor market and stock market, but still some measure of, the range of what possibly could happen to folks would be useful here. The second thing that I was curious about is what happens with the tails, right? So one thing I wondered if it was possible is to include people in the top and bottom quartile of the income distributions when you're simulating the model. Now you talk about it in the paper and you say we don't include those quartiles because we're worried about outliers. and particularly if there's measurement error in the data, that can be problematic. But there are reasons that we care particularly about the income security of low-income elderly, for example, and so it'd be useful to get a better sense of how this type of policy might particularly affect the low-income elderly. So even if you don't want to present information on, say, the top and bottom quartiles, you could pick some representation of the lowest income quartile and present information about how the lump sum policy would affect them in particular. Again, it's just this I'm really curious in both of these setups or in both of these suggestions about what's the correlation between income and the effects of the lump sum policy. So the second point I'll make is related to something that actually builds on the discussion in the first paper. In the traditional Social Security system, people can retire at any point between age 62 and 70, as we heard earlier. And essentially, their annuity is increased by the same factor for each year that they delay retirement beyond age 62. In this lump sum policy here, the lump sum is only available for people who delay retirement beyond age 65. And what I'm curious about here is how much of the action in terms of delaying people's retirement behavior comes from the fact that you're offering them a lump sum and people have preferences for the lump sum, and how much of it comes from the fact that the lump sum is only available after age 65. You kind of alluded to this in your presentation, Olivia, and my guess was exactly what you said, which is that a lot of this action is coming from the fact that they can't get the lump sum unless they delay beyond age 65. But I mention this for the following reason, sort of practical reason. So I think this paper is great. This policy innovation is great. It has a lot of great features. It's cost neutral and looks like it could lead to big changes in people's timing of retirement without actually cutting benefits, and I think that's really valuable. But I can imagine that when this got to the point of becoming policy, that what policymakers did is instead of implementing a policy where we only allow people to collect a lump sum if they delay beyond age 65, instead they put in something that's much closer to the system the way it is, which is we allow people to collect a lump sum if they delay at any point, to any point beyond age 62. And what I'm guessing that type of lump sum policy won't lead to these big changes in behavior. And if that's the case, then it would be important for policymakers to know that ex ante. And if I'm wrong, then that means there's another possible policy option on the table that could help change or could help increase people's retirement age. And then finally, as you describe the model, it's a sort of neoclassical model where people are forward-looking rational agents making decisions about their current and future consumption and work-life behavior. And what I want to encourage you to do is just to add some discussion in the paper about how the particular design of this policy and the setting in which it would be introduced might affect the size of changes that we see. So might affect the timing of people's retirement. And this builds on a lot of work that you and some of your co-authors on this have done. In particular, you've got a previous paper that looks at how people's decision about savings and retirement behavior are different if they come of retirement age in a time of crisis versus a more stable economic time. And I'd be curious here too, are there differences in what happens if you introduce the lump sum when it's when we're in an economic crisis versus a more stable period or not? And then also there was talk earlier about this, about how the rules regarding Social Security are framed when they're presented to people facing the retirement decision, and you've done some great work on this before. And what I could imagine is that depending on the framing of this, so depending on whether people are told that the lump sum offers them the flexibility to consume now or the flexibility to invest more and be able to consume more later, that differences in those types of framings could either help or undo the beneficial effects of having the lump sum policy in the first place. And so it'd be interesting to have sort of a discussion like that, particularly if we're thinking about this as a policy, as a potential policy prescription that would, you know, give folks a hint about how this could be best presented to workers to get the sizable effects that you're seeing here. And then I wrote these slides before yesterday, but as it kind of aligns well with what we've been talking about already in this conference, which is, I think there are some important general equilibrium questions here too. There's this question, this age-old question about whether keeping older workers in the market delays either the entry or otherwise squeezes out young workers. I learned yesterday that that might not be actually happening, but it's still a question out there in people's minds, and particularly policymakers might be worried about it. They're certainly worried about it in this economy. And then there also could be productivity effects, right? So what we think about encouraging people to stay in the workforce depends a little bit on their productivity, and particularly if there are these trade-offs between younger and older workers, it depends on the relative productivity of younger and older workers. And so just a little bit more discussion of those things and the possible effects of this policy on the general equilibrium setting might be useful. So I think all of this I've already said, but I think it's a really nice paper. It offers us a novel, nicely cost-neutral and politically feasible policy solution, and it's one that I think actually could be useful to consider in other settings. So, for example, these types of rules actually generate the same type of possibly inefficient behavior in public sector pensions, where people are encouraged to leave the public sector employment much earlier. There, it's even as early as 50 or 55, depending on the setting in the public sector pensions. And so you could think about a similar sort of lump sum tool in those settings as well to encourage people to stay in the workforce. So, thanks.
Thank you, Maria. Would either of you like to make comments before we go to, okay. Uh-huh. Okay.
Okay. Thank you for those helpful and very interesting comments. With respect to including the lower quintile of the income distribution, you're right, we discussed this. We thought about keeping them in the first place, but then we were worried about outlier problematics because actually data is not often very clean. But my feeling is that we did this analysis for two types of or for two samples of the populations, those that we call financially sophisticated, those who actually invest in the stock markets, and those who don't. And we saw from the analysis that Olivia presented that those who do not participate in the stock market, they have hardly any impact, or they hardly react to this option. And the others, the stock market participants, they, throughout the distribution, they also participate. So even if you take a look at non-stock market participants in the lower quintile, my feeling would be that you see comparable reactions, such that they would postpone retirement to get access to the lump sum, because particularly for stockholders, this is an interesting option. They can possibly increase their welfare through excess return in the stock market, at least if stock markets perform like they performed over the last decades, not the last couple of years. That's particularly so because even also in the low income distribution, you have many people who have hardly any financial wealth at all. So their retirement portfolio will mostly consist of Social Security income with hardly any financial wealth. So they will be very interested in getting their hands to at least some form of lump sum. General equilibrium is very interesting, but this would, at least in relation to what we did here, would remain a more theoretical discussion because one is already very complicated, difficult to solve. So I don't see that this is feasible to implement in this framework.
I just had one comment. I guess I have a mic. Yes. One comment apropos the question of why people continue to claim early. And when I was working on this earlier project with Jeff Brown and Ari Kapting on the question of claiming, we understood that the Social Security field agents, for years and years and years, took the position that they presented the decision on when to claim as a break-even analysis. And the break-even analysis is still widely popular. 2/3 of all financial advisors still use the break-even approach, and it works like this. They say, let's imagine you could get $1,000 a month in Social Security at age 62. If you defer a year, you will get whatever the appropriate number is, $1,172.79. But do you realize that you will forfeit not only the $12,000 for the year, but also the interest that you would have earned, and you would have to live 14 more years for sure to get your money back, to break even. And this was the actual script that the Social Security advisors used. And so, of course, people say, well, I don't know if I'm going to live for sure 14 more years, and maybe I better take it now. So this was the language that was in place by Social Security up until a few years ago when the agency was told them not to use it anymore, whereupon there was a big revolt on the part of the agents. Why was there the revolt? First of all, I think many agents actually believe that it's a good idea for people to claim early. But second, and somewhat more sensibly from an economist's point of view, they only get work points if people claim. So if I go in and I say, should I claim now or at the normal retirement age or 70, there's no provision whereby the agents will get compensated. So when we learned that, we then tried to do a field experiment where we actually altered the compensation scheme and in fact made it possible for people to say, okay, I come in today, I learn, and I want to claim when I'm 66. I want to file today so that it only comes into effect when I'm 66, so my agent will get his work points. At that point, we got into the union and compensation structures, and it was like, no, that's not going to happen. So there's a good reason. It's not just culture, it's compensation. And until we can focus on that, I think we're still up against a big barrier.
Thank you. Questions? Henry?
Oh. Microphone for Henry? Yep. I'm running.
I just want to put in a plug for a paper that was done about 10 years ago and included in a book I edited called Behavioral Aspects of Retirement Policy. Two psychology students here, or a psychology student and a professor here at Stanford did a no-budget survey study, which was called an airport survey, of what people's reactions would be to receiving a lump sum instead of the delayed retirement credit. So it was just focused on that aspect of it. And the findings, although based on a modest sample and not subject to the usual tests and quality standards of a more formal study, confirmed that people would like the idea of a lump sum instead of the delayed retirement credit. I was a source of that idea, and they did it. It never occurred to me to propose replacing the whole kit and caboodle with a lump sum because one of the basic functions of Social Security is to make sure that people don't make potentially serious mistakes in the management of funds. I recognize that in some countries, lump sums play a much larger role than here. But it seems to me that that motivation for maintaining the core benefit, at least in the form of a life annuity, is persuasive and strong.
So the only response I would make is that people are already claiming at young ages, and we're not removing that. we're just offering them the opportunity to claim later and get more. So I don't think that we're heading in any different direction.
Alicia?
Olivia, I just have two questions. I always liked this idea of a lump sum, and I thought it would have a big impact. But my colleagues say that people could duplicate this themselves. They could just claim early and put the money in a bank and have a lump sum later. That's one thing. And then, do you know anything about an experiment in the UK where for some period of time people could get lump sums by delaying? And I don't think anybody responded, but I don't know very much about what it was.
Maybe somebody else knows about the UK experience. I don't. I think that the right way to think about the increase in benefits, and this is consistent with John and Sita's work, is that you can get somewhere between 6 and 8% real return from delaying a year. I don't know what you invest in, but
Not
if you
wisely.
think of the alternative assets that you could buy, there really isn't anything out there like that. So I would suggest, at least in the current environment, for sure, it's not feasible to roll your own outside of Social Security.
And do you know if you don't know about the UK, do you know of any other place that has used lump sums as an incentive? Nobody? Thanks.
You need a mic.
Austria has lump sum severance payments that some people have looked at. Damon Ole and Andrea Weber, I think, have a paper on this. And I don't remember how responsive. I think people weren't particularly responsive. They weren't likely to delay to get the lump sum.
Thank you. Bob and Kathleen and Steve?
I think this is a really interesting paper. And I guess my question may seem like it's coming out from left field, but has there been any study of lottery winners? My sense is that for many, particularly low-income people who've never had a windfall of money, they have real difficulties in handling that windfall. And many run through the money very quickly. Often because of demands by other family members or friends who suddenly, need loans or gifts or whatever. And it would just strike me that that might be an analogous situation to look at.
Sudden friends.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I actually was originally going to make the same comment that Henry did, and that is that sort of by allowing people to de-annuitize, we've sort of removed some of the sort of the protection that we as a society make against people making mistakes down the line. And I think your response sounds to me like at least mostly the right response. The thing that I did want to suggest, though, is that you've got sort of more money on the table than the actuarially fair idea has. That is, you're thinking only within the Social Security system, but people who indeed do work longer are going to pay taxes, income taxes and payroll taxes for Medicare and so forth. So that would give you sort of a pool of money that could be used for deficit reduction, but it could also be used to deal with some of the other sort of issues having to do with protection and whatnot. It might be worth thinking about that, because there is a substantial wedge between the private and social value of work that it goes beyond just the Social Security system.
Steve and Gary?
I'm a little confused here. So this lump sum is payable just for deferral of claiming. It really doesn't have anything to do with working longer. So a lot of the discussion here is a little confused because of the strong implication that in order to get it, you have to keep on working. But you don't have to keep on working. The people induced to keep on working, I presume, are the people who are liquidity constrained, waiting for, they're attracted by the lump sum, and they just haven't accumulated enough wealth by age 62, so they keep on working. But there's no actual explicit return to working any longer. It's a completely.
Well, you get your wage, of course, if you continue to work. And if you delay claiming, then quite possibly that could improve your Social Security benefit, because your Social Security benefit is a function of your prior salary.
But
So
these
all
big-
that's taken into account in the calculation. But we don't force people
Right,
to
but-
keep working. That's their option.
But the big returns that we've been talking about, that people enjoy, are the returns from the actuarial adjustment after age 62. They're not the adjustment in the PIA as far as I understand. That is de minimis for most people. It's small relative to the numbers that Sita and John were talking about, correct? So it's just changing the way we give the financial payoff to deferral of claiming. It's not an explicit reward for any additional work.
It's a change in the timing of the benefit from delayed claiming. Instead of getting it eked
Right.
out
No.
as a benefit increase over the rest of your life, you get the actuarial present value at that age, right? And given that people are risk averse, and given that people don't know when they're going to die, there's some advantage to having a lump sum, even without a bequest motive, right?
I've got a question, but I want to start from some observations. There have been studies on lottery winners. They do support that they blow through the money pretty quickly. And I think it's a clever idea, but I think most people will use it to buy a boat, to remodel the house. And the only way to get that, they may have to continue working. So even though the reward isn't continuing working from the lump sum, they're still going to make it, to get that lump sum, they'll keep working. So that's just some observations. But the question is, you've priced this out on an actuarially fair basis over a lifetime. And I think the way policymakers, another way they look at it is, what's the effect on the deficit, the cash flow? And that's just money in and money out in Social Security. So my hunch is that if you put in your suggestion and lots of people took advantage of it, in the early years we'd have an improvement in the deficit, because you'd have more people working and paying in and less money going out. And in the later years, you get hammered as people start getting those lump sums. And so it'd like have an effect of improving the deficit in the short years and then making it worse in the out years. This is my hunch. Have you looked at that and thought about that?
So I think what you're pointing to is the fact that many of the government budget deficit calculations have a very short time window.
Right.
And, I would argue we should do better accounting for government programs across the board. But so what you would have is that people would delay claiming, continue paying in, get a lump sum. So it does bring forward in time the payouts. On the other hand, the Social Security Administration takes a 75-year or even in perpetuity time horizon. And so it should have no effect over that time horizon.
Yeah, some observations is there are two sets of measures. One is the Social Security time horizon. The other is the short term. What is the deficit going to look like over the next 5 to 10 years? And those are I think have two different impacts.
Right, and we know that we have to reform Social Security anyway, because the cash flow isn't going to be there within the next 10 years to pay scheduled benefits.
It unambiguously worsens the deficit, and it worsens Social Security. And the reason is it's a truncated period. So whatever period you have, as long as it's finite, you're making additional payments within the period in order to achieve savings outside the period. With respect to the budget deficit for a 10-year window, if you start making lump sum payments, it's going to work against it. There'll be some labor supply effect, presumably, but the immediate effect is those older workers are getting a lump sum. You got to pay that money.
We're going to give Dave Luigi the last question, and then we're going to break.
So I was wondering how sensitive your results are to the choice of the risk aversion, because you have a choice of a coefficient relative risk aversion of 5, which you say it's moderate. I think it's pretty high. So, I mean, these models, my personal experience with this very large risk aversion coefficient, people will arrive at retirement with quite a lot of assets for precautionary reasons. And so, in a way, it's easier for them to afford waiting So these results may actually be a little bit an exaggeration, the 1.5 change in the retirement age.
I don't know. It's not working. Okay, thank you. I don't have the number in the head right now, but it's in the paper. I think we did a sensitivity analysis with rho equal to 2, which is moderately low. And if I remember correctly, people would actually be more willing to take the lump sum because those would be the people who are more interested in going into the stock market, and they love having the lump sum, investing it in the stock market.
Thank you very much. And you now can have coffee and walk around and come back at 10:30.